It is 2 p.m. on D-Day, and in this hour, the news rings liberty, literally.
After the messages of success based on Churchill's speech at the House of Commons a couple of hours ago, which gave no details, the BBC now quotes military sources inside SHAEF that 2 beachheads have been secured in Normandy. The 2 beachheads are, of course, a reference to the Western First Army's and Eastern Second Army's overall position, not the 5 sections of those 2 beachheads. This is how CBS military expert Major George Fielding Elliott reacts to that news.
Perhaps the most important news that we have received since the all-important news that invasion had begun is this report from the British radio that 2 beachheads, not bridgeheads, a bridgehead is a river crossing, have been secured by the Allies in France. This is supported by the report just received that the Allies are penetrating inland, and by a report picked up from the Paris radio, which says that the battle in the Cotentin Peninsula, that is the Normandy Peninsula, as it has been called in other broadcasts, where the city of Cherbourg is, seems to be gaining depth. If we have, in fact, established 2 beachheads, as the British radio has announced, and as there is, therefore, every reason to believe, we have made a successful landing. We have carried through the first phase of our operations successfully. We're established on the European shore and are developing from those beachheads our operations inland against the enemy communications. We must expect the enemy to counterattack as soon as he has collected sufficient forces for the purpose.
By now, it is morning across America and Canada, and as people wake up and get the news, they stay glued to their radios. The same goes for the British Commonwealth countries, where it is now going towards or already evening. The morning papers are out in North America, and second editions of the evening papers are coming out in Australia, British India, and New Zealand. Operation Neptune dominates the front pages with headlines like Invasion, Canadians in the thick of it as Allies smash inland. Hitler's Europe invaded. Greatest military operation in history begins in France. Allies drive into France. Losses below expectations. In Philadelphia, Mayor Bernard Samuel is with a radio team at the Liberty Bell in Independence Hall. The Liberty Bell, bearing the inscription, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof," was one of the bells that rang in the first public reading of the U.S. Declaration of Independence on July 8, 1776. It is famously cracked and has not been rung since 1846.
Today is D-Day, destined to go down in history as one never to be forgotten, for it heralds the beginning of liberation for the countless millions of enslaved peoples throughout German-dominated Europe. And to those millions, the landings of the Allied troops spell the precious words of liberty. Standing as a symbol of our priceless freedom through the years is the American symbol of liberty, the Liberty Bell in Independence Hall, Philadelphia. Silent through the years, this bell once more peals out the strokes of liberty to symbolize the day of liberation for the enslaved peoples from Independence Hall in Philadelphia. WIP brings to its listeners the 7 strokes of liberty from the world-famed Liberty Bell.
The 7 tinny strokes symbolize each letter in the word liberty. The broadcast is syndicated on radio stations across the U.S. and Canada and ushers in prayer meetings that are being announced later in the day for churches, workplaces, and public institutions across both countries. Back in Normandy, in an orchard near the press headquarters in Bernières-sur-Mer, General Rodney Keller, commander of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, gives the first Allied Expeditionary Force press conference on French soil. The details from that conference will reach the world in a few hours. Meanwhile, the first reports from the press detail attached to Eisenhower outside of Portsmouth are broadcast. For CBS and NBC, it is pool reporter Merrill Mueller reporting. Before he turns to Eisenhower's first press briefing of the day, he describes the morning and night of nervous waiting, and then the humble secret camp they are in.
Otherwise, the tents show is the tree-shaded terrace and 3 pieces of deck chair furniture. You have to tear your eyes from the general to note these things because he holds your interest completely. When you appreciate his tremendous command of facts and figures, duplicated, I think, only by General Marshall, you understand why he was picked for this assignment. It is not opportune to release the details of our briefing on behalf of the General, except in 3 general ways. 1, he wanted all the credit for this campaign to go to the common soldiers of the Allied armies, and he emphasized the lower ranks and the word Allied. His order of the day takes that vein. 2, he had nothing but praise for the untiring efforts and inexhaustible research of his various staffs and his various commanders for air, sea, armies, and supplies. 3, as to the actual plan itself, perhaps I can best put it this way. I have been in on all of General Eisenhower's amphibious assaults, but none was as involved or as mammoth as this one. Last-minute headaches? Yes, the General had a last-minute headache, and he expressed it beautifully when he suddenly jumped from his chair and said, "Good heavens, there's some sunshine." Otherwise, the invasion of Europe had already been pat for days. We came out of the tent and strolled toward his proudest, newest possession, just the General and myself. He praised his new mobile office, a super deluxe job built into a 10-ton truck and trailer and presented to him by the Lockheed workers here. And then I asked him about his own nerves. He stopped, hatless in the sun. He is supposed to be phlegmatic, but he said quietly, "I'm so gall-darn nervous I boil over." He's not supposed to show it. He didn't either. I caught him only twice, wringing his hands or jiggling his English change. But I like reporting that he is human enough to feel what the lowliest of his troops feel.
As nervous as Ike may be, he can now check one box for certain success: his press operations. Freedom is being rung across the United Nations alliance countries, and in occupied territory inside the Axis terror system, he has lit the beacons of hope for a return to freedom, dignity, and humanity. At Gold Beach, there is also a box checked for success, one that will save lives and increase the likelihood of the Allies holding the beachhead.
At 2:25, the Sherwood Yeomanry Rangers have captured those 2 75mm guns up at WN-39 up on the cliffs between Arromanches and Saint-Côme. This is a big deal. They count that just one of the big guns there fired 124 shots down at Jig Beach. But beyond that, capturing this allows the 2nd Devons to really push past towards Rie. They will take it just after 4:30, and at 7:30 this evening, D Company of the 1st Hamps will take the radar station at Saint-Côme and 40 prisoners.
The fight of the U.S. Airborne on Cotentin is far more fluid, and many boxes remain to be checked before a victory can be called.
Being out of the swamps and out of sight for the time being from German pursuers has given Colonel Johnson's small band of men from the 501st time to catch their breath. Johnson knows, of course, that staying too close to the main road is an invitation for trouble. Instead, he moves his group to La Barquette Dam, which was already under their control. Here, they can not only prepare a much stronger defensive perimeter, but also keep a tight grip on this vital point. Johnson assesses the odds of assaulting nearby Saint-Côme-du-Mont. That small Norman town was the original main objective of the 501st, since it sits right on the main road leading to Carentan. Johnson sends men out to recon the area, but they come back with pessimistic news. The terrain between Saint-Côme-du-Mont Road and the La Barquette Dam is as flat and as swampy as it gets, with little to no cover, and the only high ground in the area is in the hands of the enemy, with Saint-Côme-du-Mont situated on the highest ground of all. If they move out against the town unsupported and get caught in the open, well, for now, Johnson stays put and hopes that more paras make their way to La Barquette. And indeed, there are other larger groups of survivors of the 501st still active in the area. Robert Ballard's is like 2 kilometers to the north of La Barquette at a place called Haute-Addeville. Richard Allen's is also pretty close at La Basse-Addeville. Just like Johnson, both Ballard and Allen tried to strike westward on their own in the hopes of threatening Saint-Côme-du-Mont, but the Germans made this approach impossible. Instead, they both opted to save what they could and retreated to a safer distance. Alone, They are indeed in no position to challenge the German firepower on the high ground. But getting all three groups together might tip the scales. So Johnson, who is in contact with both groups via radio and runners, now orders Ballard and Allen to move out and join him at La Barquette. With the spearheads of the 4th Division moving inland and linking up with many elements of the 101st Airborne, there are now many incidents where lost paratroopers are found and returned to their units. Also, throughout the night, many were captured by the Germans. Some were overwhelmed after surviving the jump. Others lost their weapons or were injured upon hitting the ground. Landing in the middle of a group of Germans, it was often safer to throw down your gun and surrender than try to fight unbeatable odds. Those paratroopers and glider men captured during the morning hours were naturally disarmed of their grenades, knives, and ammunition, and most of their kit was taken away. The Germans also have the habit of leaving their captives with only one boot on, so that running away would be more of a challenge. POWs were then marched to nearby farmhouses, chateaus, or hamlets where they were locked into basements and cellars. Here, they remained for most of the morning and the early afternoon. Their captors have neither the means to transport the prisoners nor to properly interrogate them. But with the battle unfolding all around, the Americans might find and free their captured comrades before the Germans can move them. Many of the chateaus and farmhouses have been and are surrounded and besieged, with machine gun bullets and bazooka rounds smashing against the walls. More often than not, though, the attackers are not aware that they are attacking a makeshift prison, so the trapped POWs are in real danger of getting killed alongside the German garrison. Trying their best to get their comrades' attention, they yell and scream over the noise of battle, or wave shirts and other uniform pieces like flags out the windows. Still, the subject of taking prisoners during the first hours of the invasion is a difficult one to assess. It is by no means guaranteed that the agitated and frightened German soldiers will not simply shoot any paratrooper they encounter on sight, surrendering or no. The same goes for the Americans, who have been drilled to kill by any means necessary. Many airborne commanders specifically task their men with not taking prisoners until after they link up with the seaborne invasion force. Fighting a guerrilla war, the airborne forces also have neither the time nor the space and means to keep the enemy subdued. So being trapped in a kill or be killed scenario, neither side is that keen on taking too many chances with the enemy's intentions of surrendering. Those who are might still resort to breaking ankles and wrists with their rifle butts to keep the enemy out of the fight, because simply locking someone away in a farmhouse or barn might just buy them time until they can get rescued or break out on their own.
Now, the airborne on Cotentin may well need some help from the men who have landed on Utah, and one of them is more than determined to provide it.
At 2 p.m., Colonel Edson Raff from the 507th PIR drops in at the beach at the head of a special task force with 17 Sherman tanks from the 746 Tank Battalion and 4 armored Greyhound scout cars. To any of you out there who know the name Edson Raff, you may be wondering, why the heck is he commanding a bunch of armor? This is the guy, after all, who's been training paratroopers for several years, commanded the 509th during Operation Torch, and is on the record as saying that jumping out of a plane to him is like getting out of bed in the morning. Why didn't he jump this morning? Well, Raff is pretty outspoken and does not see eye to eye on a lot of things with Matt Ridgway, the big kahuna, about this whole operation today. Ridgway figured that the paratroopers that landed this morning would take a bunch of small towns and villages, but would need big guns and an armored punch to hold them. So he's put Raff in charge of this force, whose special assignment is to hit the beach and then race for Saint-Mère-Église and bring that punch to them. Raff really does not like this task at all, but he is a master jumper, and this is a tricky jump, and he has actually commanded an ad hoc armored force before in North Africa. Well, like it or not, he lands with Task Force Raff as this hour begins. With 40 infantrymen of the 401st Glider Infantry riding on the hulls of the tanks, they will try to reach the town and take it by surprise, not knowing who of their guys and who of the enemy might be there. Along the way, they are to keep their eyes and ears open and achieve what radios can seemingly not: make contact with as many paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne as possible.
The situation at Omaha is still more complex. The Americans have made progress, but there is still German resistance.
Now making its way towards Colleville-sur-Mer is the 1st Battalion of the 16th. All three of its companies have a tough time slowly penetrating the bocage, though, encountering German snipers and machine gun squads, as well as sporadic mortar and artillery fire. Contact with the enemy is pretty much continuous throughout this countryside of sunken roads and hedgerows. The Germans, although lacking an overall plan, are proving to be excellent at delaying and counterattacking the advancing Americans in small groups, the thick foliage of the surrounding trees and hedges being excellent help in concealing their ambushes. The battalion moved through the 16th, which had had heavy casualties, to the west edge of Colleville-sur-Mer by following sunken roads and hedge lines. The Germans had most of the gates and breaks in the hedges zeroed in with rifles and machine guns, and several of our men were lost as they advanced. It might be well to bring out at this time that this fighting is much different than any encountered before by this division. The ground is covered with trees and hedgerows, making concealment excellent, but observation is practically non-existent. Fighting is at very close ranges, and this increases the difficulty. At the east end of Omaha, Company L has now finally repulsed the German counterattack by the fork in the road. Supported by Companies I and K, the men continue forward over open terrain into Le Grand Hameau. See, by mid-afternoon, the German defenders in general are left with an increasingly bleak choice. They can either stay and hang on to their continuously shrinking perimeters in the hopes that they'll somehow get reinforcements, or they can flee to the south and yield the coastline to the overwhelming firepower of the Americans. So now, with Virville and Le Grand Hameau in Allied hands, and Colleville at least halfway there, more and more Germans are choosing option B to escape being trapped. But time is running out. The Americans now hold nearly all of the ways through which the Germans could escape, or through which their reinforcements would have to arrive. Only 3 paved roads lead from Omaha Beach south. 2 of those are in American hands. The third one, from Saint Laurent to Formigny, is still controlled by the Germans, but if the Americans can take Saint Laurent, then this will fall as well, and then anyone left in the area will be trapped.
It's not as clear as on Utah, but as the troops on Omaha move inland, they too are connecting with the airborne of the 101st.
Speaking of airborne troops, we haven't yet had time to look at their training, their equipment, and the different ways they are expected to fight. Let's have a look. There are no accidental paratroopers in the British and American airborne forces, and no one is pushed out of a plane. Each and every one is a volunteer, specially selected and well-trained to do one of the most dangerous jobs in the war. For D-Day, the paratroopers are, as we've seen, to jump into hostile territory and secure objectives vital to the success of the whole operation. But once the Wehrmacht is alerted to their presence, then all hell breaks loose. To not only survive, but to fight their way through the madness on the ground, they need the best weapons, gear, and equipment available. Once dropped behind enemy lines, they cannot expect to be supplied or even reinforced for a long period of time, and must fight largely autonomously. If need be, paratroopers take on the role of assault troopers, guerrilla fighters, and sometimes even commandos to overcome enemy resistance. So their equipment must be equally versatile, specially selected, and often manufactured particularly to meet their demands in the field. Even regular infantry equipment is often modified, lightened, or otherwise altered to be useful for aggressive small unit search and destroy missions, from boots to rifles to anti-tank guns. The U.S. conducted experiments with military parachuting throughout the 1930s. But none of this was ready when they entered the war in Europe. To build up their 82nd and 101st Airborne Forces as quickly as possible, U.S. High Command naturally studied how the German Fallschirmjäger performed. The early American jumpsuits were basically nothing more than modified coveralls that resembled the German Knochensack that was to be worn over the regular uniform. It was not before mid-1942 that they issue the first lightweight drab jacket. Its most notable features are the slashed breast pockets and the deep cargo pockets on the sides. The pants still pretty much resemble the German design, but they're baggier. They have multiple slanted pockets to give the para faster access to his equipment and a sewn-in belt at the waist. At first, the U.S. thought of issuing a new helmet, and the first airborne trials were indeed performed with aviator or indeed football helmets. Soon, though, they simply settle on the standard turtle helmet, but with a stronger chin strap or chin cup to it. Among the most innovative designs in the American Airborne is probably the freshly designed Corcoran jump boots. Laced up tightly, these high jump boots made out of reinforced leather provide excellent support for ankles, toes, and heels. Unlike the British, the Americans did not have a standard parachute, and only by 1940 introduced their first military version, the T-4. The T-4 was a designated static line chute, meaning that it was hooked to a line inside the plane and would automatically deploy with the trooper jumping out of the plane. Its canopy was around 9 meters in diameter and made out of silk or nylon. But also, unlike the British, the U.S. issues its paratroopers reserve parachutes just in case the first one fails to deploy. But although that offers some kind of life insurance during the jump, it also burdens the trooper with an extra bulk slung across his chest. The T-4's reserve had to be attached vertically to the harness via snap hooks, which left very little room for additional items to be stuffed into the breast pockets. By 1942, the improved T-5 is introduced, which solves this problem. Now the reserve can be worn horizontally across the chest, so it allows for other equipment to be carried underneath. The T-5 also has a quick release mechanism attached to it, nicknamed the bang box. It allows the paratrooper to quickly detach himself from the chutes. After landing, of course. For fighting the Germans, each paratrooper is issued 2 fragmentation grenades, the Mark II Pineapple, which can be thrown or fired from a rifle. Also 1 white phosphorus smoke grenade, which produces a hot flame and can also be used as an improvised anti-personnel grenade. And 1 M18 smoke grenade, which produces a colored cloud of smoke. The Americans offer their airborne forces a wide arsenal of weapons. Most common among regular troopers is the semi-automatic rifle M1 Garand. Clip-fed, it weighs only 4.3 kilos, but has to be safely stored in a Griswold bag or another padded drop bag because of its size. Sometimes paratroopers opt for attaching the rifles to their harnesses to have them ready instantly upon landing, but this is both risky and dangerous. An alternative is the M1 carbine, which is both shorter and lighter, weighing only 2.5 kilos. A special paratrooper version, the M1A1, has a folding tubular shoulder stock and a pistol grip. A favorite for close combat is the .45 caliber Thompson submachine gun, both M1 and M1A1. Each company is allotted 6 submachine guns, and the dedicated gunner usually carries 20 or 30 round box magazines. Technically, there is also the 50 round drum magazine in case they want to go full Chicago typewriter style on the Germans. However, many feel that that drum is too cumbersome and unwieldy because of its weight and size. To have more ammo ready, the paras simply tape 2 box magazines together. Speaking of ammo, each paratrooper is issued 150 rounds of ammunition. These are spent quickly during firefights, and since that supply is finite, there are many men who wear extra bandoliers or stuff extra ammo inside their canteens. No one wants to face the Germans with an empty gun. Another option is the M3 and M3A1 grease gun. Firing the same .45 caliber, the grease gun is a little lighter than the Thompson. At first, each paratrooper was issued a sidearm, usually an M1911, but as the force has increased in size, only a fraction of the men have received additional handguns. For heavier support fire, the men are issued the Browning automatic rifle. As an assault rifle, the BAR can also be fixed to a bipod and operated in the role of a light machine gun. But for the real full auto experience, the Paras are given both the Browning 30 and 50 calibers. These are, however, often considered too heavy for a single leg bag and have to be dropped in containers. Same goes for the 60mm M2 mortar. This portable mortar can fire high explosive shells, smoke, or illumination rounds. There are attempts to drop in the heavier 75mm and 105mm howitzers as well. Each comes in 9 different boxes on color-coded parachutes. But searching for 9 different containers in the middle of the night in enemy-held territory to assemble a single howitzer, that sounds like a real nightmare. They decide it's safer for Waco gliders to bring them in. Against German armor, each para company is equipped with the modified bazooka, the M9. 1.55 meters long, the M9 can be broken into 2 sections and is fired by an impulse magneto in its handle. Designated demolition troopers carry C2 demolition blocks and TNT, as well as Hawkins light anti-tank mines. In their demo kit, they also store walkie-talkies, as well as fuses and detonator cords. Ideally, the paratroopers remain unseen and unnoticed as long as possible, at least until they have found their equipment and located other members of their outfit. So, it isn't just about guns and grenades. Sometimes, the most important thing a paratrooper can have is a compass worn on the wrist like a watch, or the basic first aid pouch with field dressings, morphine, and a tourniquet. Many men also store extra compresses on their helmets. Then there is the standard infantryman stuff: entrenching tools, ammo pouches, cleaning and maintenance tools like oil or grease bottles. The standard field pack is filled with ration packs, soap, extra laces, a shaving kit and toothbrush, cigarettes, and a Zippo lighter. Paratroops carry an additional survival kit containing a map with escape and evasion routes, a small saw blade, binoculars, a flashlight, and some French currency. Paratrooper pockets are famously deep, both literally and figuratively. Each man packs a K ration consisting of 3 meals, several D rations, and chocolate bars, but although they are issued additional leg bags and separate containers, each man wants to carry as much equipment and ammunition on his person as possible. So many things can go wrong during a jump. The leg bag might snap loose, or the containers land on some rooftop among the enemy. But also, every ounce counts, and each additional item increases the risk of injury upon landing. The Americans are not the only ones packing their bags full for D-Day, of course. By the time it comes to prepare for Normandy, the British Parachute Regiment has already gained valuable experience during Operation Torch and the invasion of Sicily. Already their reputation and ethos has attracted a lot of men that wanted to be part of an elite fighting force, but it is truly their equipment that embodies the airborne soldier of the modern age. The concept of military parachuting was still relatively new to Britain when the German Fallschirmjäger and glider infantry were overtaking airfields and fortifications in Denmark, Norway, and Belgium. Like the Americans, the British and Commonwealth paras had to build up everything from scratch as quickly as possible. Resources were not exactly overabundant, so their early step-in smocks, paratroop jackets, and side-lacing boots were almost direct copies of what the Fallschirmjäger used. It was obvious that much of the existing British uniforms and gear had to be either modified or specially manufactured to work under the parachute. The British standard helmet, for example, was totally unusable for jumping because of its wide brim, so they had to come up with a new design. The rubber Sorbo helmet resembles sort of a love child between a dispatch rider's helmet and headgear from Flash Gordon, right? I'm sure there's pictures. It was used for training purposes only, until in 1942, the British introduced the round-shell HSAT helmet for combat jumps. Around the same time, British Airborne Command authorized the iconic maroon beret as part of the outfit. By 1942, the Paras are also officially issued the Denison smock, which is worn over the standard 1937 battle dress. An additional oversmock is issued soon after, mainly as a safety precaution to prevent equipment from getting tangled with the rigging lines. The Denison is mostly made out of light denim material, and also is the first official uniform piece in the British Army with a disruptive camouflage pattern on it. The smock has a long tail at its back that can be attached between the legs before the jump to keep the dress in place. Some paras also choose to wear MRC body armor underneath the smock. This is made up of 3 plates of manganese steel that cover the chest, lower belly, and back. Although a very modern idea, it proves unpopular since it causes chafing and restricts quick movement. When it comes to developing parachutes, the British settle on the standard X-type already in 1940. The X-type consists of 4 parts. The parachute itself is made out of silk, nylon, and Ramex cotton. It is separated into an inner and outer pack, and the harness. The parachute's canopy is 714 centimeters in diameter, and its rigging lines are 7.6 meters long. Unlike the American airborne, the British do not offer their paras a reserve chute. Instead, they put their trust fully in the X-type, reminding the packers that every parachute is a man's life. But jumping and surviving the jump is one thing. Engaging the enemy in battle on the ground and fulfilling their objectives is another. For that, the British formed the Central Landing Establishment, which later became the Airborne Forces Experimental Establishment. Here, they experiment on how uniforms and equipment function under the parachute. The major problem is, of course, the weight. Training jumps with fully loaded kits are the most critical moments, leading to injuries and fatalities. So they have to find the delicate balance between outfitting each single trooper with as much equipment and ammunition as possible, but not overburdening him to the point where he will break his legs or his ankles on landing because of the weight attached to him. The weapons are mostly the same that regular British infantry carry into battle. Para-riflemen either carry the traditional SMLE Mark III or the Lee Enfield No. 4 rifle. Because of their size, these rifles must be put in a specially designed jump bag, which of course takes additional time to sort out after a landing. Many favor the compact Sten Mark V submachine gun. With a detachable stock, the Sten does not need to be put in a case and can be directly attached to the harness itself instead. This is very handy if the para gets into a firefight directly after landing. For fire support, the Airborne is also issued 303 Bren light machine guns. With a 30-round magazine and a range of 550 meters, the Bren is highly effective for both mobile and defensive action. Many paras also wear the Fairbairn Sykes Commando Dagger or the Camilla Stiletto at a special pocket sewn into the battle dress trousers. The dagger is not only for the closest of combat situations, but is also useful for cutting oneself free from the rigging, like if the chute is caught on something. The introduction of the leg bag allows for an additional 45 kilos of weight to be carried in the jump. Dangling from the leg from a rope, the bag will always land first, and thus decrease the risk of injury. But everything larger and heavier has to go into a separate drop container, the CLE. These supply containers are packed with ammunition, grenades, and the support weapons like the Piat recoilless rifle and the 3-inch mortar. I've already talked about the Piat earlier today. The 3-inch mortar can fire a wide array of useful grenades against enemy positions. Speaking of useful grenades, the paras also carry the number 82 gammon bomb next to their frag grenades. This has been intentionally designed for the paratroopers, since its explosive load can be adjusted depending whether they're fighting infantry or armor. In case the men have to drag those containers somewhere, they are equipped with a toggle rope, which also helps them climb over obstacles or transport wounded troopers. The CLE containers have, of course, their own parachutes and an additional crash pan at the bottom, which absorbs the shock on landing. The chutes themselves are color-coded to let the paras easily identify what they carry, so they don't have to rummage through each one looking for the right equipment. Further experiments have been made as to how to provide more mobility to the paras upon landing using those containers. Ideas include collapsible motorcycles and folding bicycles, lightweight jeeps, and even full motorcycles. However, these are still mostly delivered by gliders. A special outfit among the airborne forces is the Pathfinders. These are paratroopers that drop in before the main force and mark the drop zones for those to follow, as we've seen. They are introduced by the same person who developed the leg bag, British Major John Lander. Fitting name. Pathfinders carry specialized equipment to fulfill their mission. They have ground identification panels, which are basically large colored sheets of fabric, 5G radio transmitters, and radar devices, the Eurekas. They also carry special smoke grenades and vary pistols that fire colored flares. The men ready to jump into battle today have been selected for being physically and mentally tough, and filled with enough strength, drive, and determination to fight through hostile terrain. They are outfitted with the best weaponry and equipment available. Emphasis, though, on the word available. More than 13,000 paratroopers, American, British, Canadian, and other allies, will parachute into Normandy on D-Day. And a large fraction of them still have little to no weapons or the gear that they are supposed to have upon landing. Estimates run as high as 60% loss when it comes to their equipment. Mortars, ammunition, radios are scattered all over, just not in the landing zone they are supposed to hit. It isn't uncommon that once the chute opens, the heavily packed pockets tear open, or the leg bag is ripped away during the descent. Turbulence, heavy weather, and German anti-aircraft fire are factors that are hard to anticipate and account for. Yet it is the paratroopers' unshakable can-do attitude that will either see them prevail or be destroyed on the ground. To prevent the Wehrmacht from sealing off the beaches or blocking the roads and bridges, they must be two things above anything else: inventive and versatile. That means finding ways to fight with the equipment they have at hand, using German weapons if they have to, and generally being ready to kill and survive with whatever is available to them. And a place where they have had a decisive importance today is beyond any doubt the bridges at Bénouville. We had a look at that area of combat and the bridges when we were in Normandy last fall, and it's quite eye-opening to be on the ground. Paul, before we get into this, I want to just say a few words, not really as a lead-in, but just something that's actually personal. This is the first time I've ever been in this location. I've read a great deal about it. I've seen films that cover it and stuff, but I've never actually been here before. And even just walking up, it really puts a lot of things in perspective. So I'd like you to tell us where we are, but I'd also like you to point to things so everybody else who knows as much as I do about this content can get the real actual physical you are there perspective, which changes everything, and everybody who doesn't can really see how it all fits together, okay?
So we are at what we now call Pegasus Bridge. At the time, Bénouville Bridge is a canal bridge. A couple hundred yards that way is a river bridge. They're now called Horse Bridge. It's just a swing bridge made by Gustave Eiffel back in the day. Sword Beach, as it became, is a few miles north of me. Caen, the city, is behind us there, and this is the main road that crosses these two crossing points. That is the only crossing point of the canal and the river between Caen and the beach. And the ridge of high ground over there is where the British 6th Airborne Division will be landing by parachute and glider in the early morning of D-Day, and they are to hold that ground there to facilitate the move towards Caen, the vital crossroads town, the linchpin of the Normandy campaign. So the airborne are over there, but to reinforce the airborne, they've got to come from Sword Beach across these two bridges here. So these bridges are absolutely vital to everything that is built after this to make sure the success of the invasion is there.
What strikes me standing here, I have been here a couple of times before, but what strikes me every time I come here is how close all of these different things are, and how it's not, when you read it, you get this feeling of, well, we're in the middle of the countryside, but we're not. So explain to us a little bit what we're looking at, the different structures and how they're connected to each other on that day.
So there's a chateau over there. At the time, Bénouville Chateau was a maternity hospital. It had children in there. There'd been some other people gathered there because of the pre-D-Day bombardment there. And there was a lady who was working there as a matron who was pivotal to the information that was gathered about this area, because she is supplying this information to the resistance that's going to the Allies in England to prepare their understanding of just how important this area was. So that chateau is very integral to it. We've got buildings over there. Benouville is an urban environment. The bridge was always a busy one because it had a customs office and a control point. There were checkpoints. This is going back before the Germans were here. It was always an important artery. And then the church and the village kind of established themselves around the crossing point of the canal. It was that order rather than some villages just established. It was all about the crossing point of these waterways.
And when we talked about it now in the episode, I mean, of course, we described exactly what was happening with the snipers over there, and they had to take them out and everything. When you look at it from here, right? I mean, you see exactly why that's a problem, right? Yeah, because you have the straight line going there right over to the bridge, which kind of, you fail to understand that until you really see it physically, what it means. Yeah. So, and they came down in gliders here, not in parachutes. Why is that?
Well, it's simply because parachute troops take time to assemble on the ground. A stick of men, depending on what speed the aircraft is going, they may be scattered over half a mile or a mile or two. And here, every second counts. So getting men in one place together, and there's the next thing, is silently. The Germans had this bridge patrolled 24 hours a day, pretty much. So if an aircraft bringing paratroopers comes into the area, they're going to hear the engine noise. If they hear the engine noise, they're on alert, maybe, because we knew this from the resistance, they could detonate the charges, blow up the bridge, and we lose it as a crossing point. Gliders, however, silently bring in 32 fully laden men to one location. Out they get, then a minute later a second glider and a third glider, and then 3 more gliders for the other bridge over there. So this can happen almost within a blink of an eye, and that's the reason of gliders. And 32 for a Horsa, probably a Mark I Horsa, was an incredible amount of men, because Major John Howard deliberately chose from the company the shorter guys. No point taking in a glider load of Spartacuses, because you only better get 16 in the glider.
Right, yeah.
Take 32 little guys and you've got that much more firepower, because everyone's got a Sten gun or a rifle. So 32 men in a glider is amazing.
What really blows my mind being here is how close the gliders are.
Yeah.
I know the numbers.
It's insane,
but when
isn't
you
it?
see, I mean, it's right there. It's right there.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I see they've got markers and stuff here now. That's really, really impressive. That's something that, well, we're probably having footage right now showing how close the gliders are to the bridge, and yeah, as you say, patrol 24 hours and not seeing this coming. You know,
and it was probably one of the most excellent pieces of flying in World War II.
Well, the probably is something that's annoyed me for years, because it was Lee Mallory, who I always describe as the Eeyore of the Allied planners. He was a bit dour, a bit glum.
We've talked about him a bunch.
And Lee Mallory said after this, it was probably the most amazing bit of precision flying. And the thing that's amazing about it is it's not the ideal location to land gliders here. It's the only location. You can't land there, it's too urban. Can't land over there, it's urban. Can't land over there where the museum is today, because that was all swampy. You've got this stretch of hard ground with the canal on one side, and there's a pond over there, and then the gliders had to come from England, which is that way, do a big circular route on a church tower, and then following the canal, using their reflection, it's moonlight of course, they can follow the canal there and then come in there and land. But because of the conditions that morning, they're coming in with a tailwind, which is less than ideal for a glider. The other big glider zones, the pilot's able to maneuver and come in, so he's into the wind to slow it down. But these guys are coming in with a tailwind behind them. And the nose of the first glider, piloted by Jim Walwork, who was a fantastic guy and quite a good friend of mine, he brings that glider in at 15 minutes after midnight, and the glider nose comes down, and they know this, 47 yards from the bridge. And there's some things, as you guys know with history, that we're not certain about statistics. We know that because the glider pilots later on in the day got out a tape measure and they actually measured it. They knew this was cool. They knew they'd done the job, and they went, yep, 47 yards, which I've been here so many times. It's still insane they were able to do that in the middle of the night. Yeah, that's the thing. And you're one chance. You can't loop round a second time. Bring in that glider, bang.
And it was supposed to be 50, right? So
they were 3 yards closer. But
that had an advantage. That had a real advantage.
Yeah. The Germans know this is important. They've identified this, and the Allies have identified this very early as a critical point. So there's barbed wire perimeters all around this. The nose of that first glider had pierced through that outer string of barbed wire, which means the internal door on the glider is now on the inside of the barbed wire. So they're off and running towards that bridge. Grenades go in the 5 centimeter German gun position, bang, bang, there's no one actually there. Off they go across the bridge there. Lieutenant Den Brotheridge, who's Major Howard's second in command, leading the way across the bridge there. And they're kind of across the other side before the Germans have even really realized what's going on.
I mean, I know Major Howard said that it took less than 2 minutes for them to be up and running. Might not be exactly 2 minutes, but
it's very short space of time.
It doesn't really matter if it was 2 minutes or it was 4 minutes. That's amazing. I mean, that doesn't happen normally.
And we were very blessed that the morning of, or the night of June the 5th, 6th, there was a rather popular and apparently rather affordable brothel in Benouville, and that's where a lot of the German troops were that morning.
We're going to visit that in just a little while.
Yeah, well, again after last night, yeah. What was weird, and this is a little bit of kind of extra detail that I like to say is it's almost certain that the two German sentries who were near the bridge that night were French customs guys in their 70s with greatcoats and helmets on, who were paid to stand there overnight, and if a staff car came past, they kind of lift up their barrel. No one cared about saluting or checking past, and off they go. And they would pay these guys on the nights they're off at the carousing. And it was probably those two guys there that night who promptly just dropped their helmets, threw away the greatcoats and ran away. So there was no immediate response.
Without a doubt, it is part of the linchpin of the whole campaign, which is Caen at the end of the day. But this is this is the linchpin of the linchpin, so to say. There's no question. But over the years, it's taken on sort of this weird, almost mythical existence, which kind of belies a little bit actually how good they were at taking it, because you get the feeling, if you read some of the books, that this was like a 12-hour fight that was really harsh and everything. And I'm saying that belittles the greatness of the operation.
Yeah, and it also ignores the great majority of the 6th Airborne Division that are over there doing what they're doing, which is keeping the Germans away from this area. And when we go to high ground later and see the view back towards Soar Beach, this is integral. But you also need the high ground over there, because when the British start moving towards Caen from Soar Beach, if they've got a high ridge of high ground on their eastern flank occupied by the Germans with artillery and tanks and everything else, that's not fun at all. So those 6th Airborne guys over there who are battling in villages like Ronville and Breville and Omfreville, they don't get the glory that these guys got because of the brilliance of this. I mean, Walworth, when he executed that landing there, and there's another glider a minute later and a minute after that, it's superb. And these guys are brilliant, but they are only the first step. And one of the things I think gets forgotten is that this is to seize these bridges to reinforce that division. But the division are landing by parachute whether or not this goes ahead. Now, we now know that within 10 minutes of landing, they've sent the signal, ham and jam, for the successful capture of the bridges. Interestingly, though, the actual message received by probably 7th Parachute Battalion headquarters was ham and fucking jam, because the signaller was trying to get through and go ham and jam, ham and jam, ham and fucking jam, and finally that's when the other guy picked up. So that was the message that was sent. And they've got these two bridges there, but those guys are landing by parachute immediately. If these bridges are not seized, and in the worst case scenario, they're blown up by the Germans, that division over there have no means of easy support. I mean, you could say the same thing about the American Airborne having to rely on troops coming through from Utah, but there are various routes they can come across. This is one single road over one single crossing point of these two waterways. Everything is hinging on this one event going like clockwork. Okay,
but there is one moment during the night when the bridge almost goes up, thanks to the Luftwaffe. And that was the bit of luck. And the bomb that they dropped was a dud and nothing happened. And spoilers now, because you'll be seeing this before the day is over, we do not meet the Allies do not meet the D-Day objectives fully. They don't meet the D-Day objectives fully. So, now, assuming...
I see where your question's going. Okay, go ahead, okay.
Assuming that, they wouldn't have taken Pegasus Bridge, or taken Benouville Bridge, they would still have had time to construct a new bridge and all of that. So, with the D-Day objectives not met, is it really that important?
I always think it's actually the other bridge, because this is the canal which has good solid banks and things, and they actually threw up some Bailey bridges here within a matter of days that were used for Operation Goodwood in July. It's the river, that distance over there, that will be the trickier bridge waterway to bridge. So yeah, they probably could have got the bridges over here fairly easy, but what became Horsa Bridge would be much more tricky, I think. So I think that's, if we have to identify a single bridge that had to be seized, it's Horsa Bridge, as it's now known, rather than Pegasus Bridge. It's the vital one, because that's the more difficult one to bridge later.
How long would it have taken them to get over that bridge? Why? I know it's a guess, but are we talking hours,
would they
days,
be under fire, or
would they exactly?
A couple of days, maybe. The British have engineers from the 3rd Division up in this area by early afternoon, mid-afternoon on June the 6th, but that's lightly equipped engineers who've been on foot. The bridging gear is going to take some time to come up, so every hour counts when you're a paratrooper there on that high ground.
And you'd have Germans coming in from both sides. So
and that's the other thing. Major Howard, who was commanding D Company Oxenbuck's Light Infantry, I knew Major Howard quite well, and he was never really worried about the moving in and seizing the bridge, because you're achieving tactical surprise. Right. It's coming, as we said, coming out of the darkness silently. It's holding it, because Sword Beach is 9 miles away. The estimated time of arrival for the commandos, who are not actually reinforcing the bridge, they're moving through to the high ground. That's midday. So you're talking, these gliders are landing at just after midnight. So that's 12 hours before the first reinforcements are due to arrive. And you've got 21st Panzer, who, as we know, had been a pretty elite formation out in North Africa. They're lesser threat in 44 than they had been, but their closest elements are 5 or 6 miles away. And they're in tanks. So when your reinforcements are 12 miles away and they're commandos on foot with a few bicycles, and there's German tanks just down the road, that's Howard's worry. And the ridiculous thing is when we still haven't determined whether it's a Marder or a Sturg or whatever, but a German armoured vehicle comes up from through Benouville, and there's a British guy with a Piat, Wagger Thornton his name was, and he fires a couple of bombs, and the first one misses and the second one misses, but he hits this vehicle. And one of the versions of the story is it hit a stowage panel on the side of the vehicle, and all these flares go off, yellow and blue and pink and stuff goes off. And the Germans following are possibly alarmed by that, and what the hell have those allies got there in terms of anti-tank fire, and they kind of fall back a bit. Okay. And if it maybe hadn't hit that stowage bin, it's one version of the story. We still haven't decided where the vehicle was knocked out and what type of vehicle it is, but the point is, the first probe by 21st Panzer has this kind of lucky bit where it bumps into a unit that isn't very strong, but they perceive it for being stronger than it is. Because of events, yeah. Because of events and just circumstance. And 21st Panzer back off and do things elsewhere. And then finally, and this is the bit of the story that is in the Longest Day film and everyone knows, is that there are guys, and I knew some of these guys, they're sitting there, they've been holding all day. There's been some sporadic action. There's been the fire coming from the chateau. The Germans probably dragged a 20mm cannon up there that's raking the bridge there. And they're saying, what the hell's that noise? And they can hear this, no, what is it? And it sounds like bagpipes. And then they realize it is bagpipes, and elements of Lord Lovat's commandos are arriving with his personal piper, Bill Millen, and they do hear na 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 na, and up come the pipers. There had actually been a few commandos who had already crossed at that point, one of the troops on bicycles. But when they see Lord Lovat arriving and they have the piper there, the sense of relief amongst these guys was, you could have sensed it, because it's the link up has occurred, this vital moment when the troops on the beach have got here. But I said they're not staying, they're going up to the high ground, and then Major Howard can go, job done. And I think I always would like to get across the idea that although Eisenhower probably wasn't aware of this immediately, if you're planning or overseeing something as complex and complicated and vast as Overlord, if the first bit goes well, which this is the first bit, that's a good piece of the jigsaw puzzle on that board there to go, right, okay, that's it, we've got it done. And this is an exceptionally bit of action here, unfolded almost perfectly, and it starts everything off.
Wasn't Lovett late?
He was a few minutes late, was a few minutes between friends, but he did
apologize.
He did apologize profusely, and in the movie,
15 minutes late.
he actually carries on across the bridge with the piper piping across the bridge. And Bill Millen told me years ago, he said, everyone thinks I piped across the bridge there, but he mentioned the shadows. We're under fire from snipers and machine gun fire. He said, the only way to cross that bridge on D-Day was crouching. He said, you can't crouch and play the bagpipes at the same time. So had been playing the bagpipes, stopped playing the bagpipes, got to the other side again, carried on with the bagpipes again over there, but not across the bridge.
At the previous bridge over at Saint-Mary-Église, we saw a more traditional bite and hold tactic where you're holding a whole region in order to control that and control crossroads and everything. this is kind of an evolution of that, because we're seeing one point where you bisect all of Normandy, so it's really cut in two, and it creates a lot of problems for the Germans. I think you've covered something kind of similar happening on the Eastern Front, which is a new thing in this war, right?
Okay, well, what you're seeing then, this is in a micro version, a very micro version here, would be sort of a mid-point, not an end game, but a mid-game of like real Bewegungskrieg and Blitzkrieg theory. Like, okay, starting, Bewegungskrieg wasn't just German, it was the mobile warfare. It started with the Prussians because they knew they were going to be outnumbered against pretty much everyone they were fighting, but they had the tactics and weapons up, so they had to have the mobile warfare since they couldn't fight a battle of attrition. And this carried over into the German Empire, even though they did have manpower by then since they had all the rest of the empire. But when you see it at its most successful, and let's say the beginning stages of Barbarossa as an example, right? The armored spearheads go out, but they're not just driving straight ahead randomly and then stop and wait for the infantry. They really are trying, like the cauldrons they were seizing, like around Kiev, seizing 600,000 people in here. They reach a point, like this point, where you have now left the enemy with a binary situation. They have two things. There's not like for example, if the 21st Panzers had come here, right? Then they would have had options.
Yeah, exactly.
Of options. But once it's taken, there's two options, and it's closed down, and that is where you will have a successful Blitzkrieg. It's a lot easier to lead to stage 3, taking 600,000 prisoners or whatever. But on the other side, that can easily fail, which, like we saw in July 1942 during Fall Blau, the world's biggest traffic jam, when the things were not taking as many prisoners as Hitler would have liked. And Bach and List are saying, no, we're still taking plenty of land. This is fine. They're going back. But the Soviets had by then not learned to effectively counter, say, panzer warfare or blitzkrieg, but to counter the large gaps, the plan B, the point taking of the Bewegungskrieg. Because they took all the land, but there were no prisoners. It was no longer a binary situation. The Soviets were willing to give up endless miles of territory in order to avoid being put into an A or B situation, which led to Hitler rearranging the armies and sending the 4th Panzer Army down to Rostov, where there's already a Panzer Army, and creating the world's biggest traffic jam, and running out of fuel and having 3 or 4 days with tens of thousands of vehicles just sitting around Rostov while the Soviets get to reorganize, bring everybody towards Stalingrad, 6 armies walking to Stalingrad, basically, with its flanks exposed, and we all know what happened to that later on. So yeah, you can really see the success and failure, but creating the binary situation, that's absolutely key.
What we're seeing here, because of the evolution of warfare into a mobile war on both sides at the end of the day, is an evolution of bite and hold into bite and hold to interdict. Now, we're going to talk about traffic jams within that context in a different segment of this of this event. But here, when Benouville Bridge and what is now Horsa Bridge are taken, the Germans are left with 2 options. How does that influence the rest of the day?
Well, the 21st Panzer is not a real threat anyway, because it's not had its vehicles replaced. Lots of Marder, lots of maybe Mark IVs. They haven't got the Panthers and the Tigers. But now they are into this option of they've either got to go, because Caen is that way, they've either got to go and try and attack the British airborne on the ridge, which is forested, woods, difficult movement there, or they've got to try and focus on that side and go towards Sword Beach. So an already less than effective Panzer Division is now split into 2 parts of a Panzer Division because they don't have the options of it. If they have this, given we're sitting within a 5 centimetre pack here, is there's already a defence around this. If the 21st Panzer had got here, they can then make this into one of those classic Normandy kind of hedgehog positions and hold it, and it gives them options theoretically to go this way, go that way, but because the Allies have it, the Germans are reduced to 2 choices, neither of which are good and neither of which ultimately pay off for them. And when they do make a final push, eventually when their commanders decide what they're going to do, and an element is sent off towards the gap that has now established itself between Juno and Sword Beaches, it's too small, there's not enough tanks in it, it's been too late coming, and they get there and they bump into basically anti-tank units of the British and Canadian armies, and it all ends up in burning panzers. So the 21st Panzer's fear effect, because the Allies were worried about 21st Panzer. You don't want to be landing Airborne Division on a division that you've come up against in North Africa who have bested you on previous occasions. Paratroopers with Lee Enfields and Sten guns. But in the end, the 21st Panzer just didn't do enough to live up to their reputation because partly of their options being reduced.
We are going to see the choice that 21st Panzer does make and how reduced it has been because of what we just talked about, but also because of traffic jams.
Yeah.
So, Paul, now we are at Breville Ridge, and we're looking back towards where we were only a couple of seconds ago, basically.
Yeah,
teleportation, right? Explain how this whole bite and hold strategy that we saw at Pegasus Bridge ties into this place and how it all comes together, because now we got the whole vista in front of us.
Well, the first thing is, so the bridge is down there in the village. The bridge is, as we said earlier, it's the connecting area between the two potential means the Germans had of moving towards the beaches and to stop this invasion. But the point about the ridge is, this is the left-hand flank for the Allies. Everything else that happens on D-Day is happening that way from us. And the 6th Airborne Division are jumping by parachute onto this ridge over here to occupy this area. Nearly 100 gliders are going to be landing into those two fields down there by the end of June the 6th, June the 7th to reinforce this division, to hold this area here and make sure we've just got that firm flank position in there to base everything else from.
Okay, so if Pegasus falls, they're facing two fronts,
If
right?
Pegasus falls, then the Germans control the road network there, which means the Allies don't get the reinforcements from Sword to here, which means the British Airborne Division is essentially isolated and overrun, and the Germans are then here with their artillery, potentially armour, using the forests and wooded area down there to move in and out of to kind of keep away from Allied air power, and then they can keep that whole area there under fire. And indeed, it takes the Allies a month to move from Saw Beach over there to Caen over there, and they are moving through that open, exposed area there, but they're doing so under a protection of this carpet of Allied soldiers in the British Airborne here for 3 months, because they do hold this ridge. It's all about this ridge.
How many roads are there, lateral roads back there?
So we can see from here about 3 or 4, and there's another 2 or 3 beyond that. Right at the distance, there's a water tower kind of in the sunlight over there. And these are the arterial roads. There's cars going past us right down there that are going to be moving under the threat of this. And so there is German artillery here. I don't want to say there is none. What it is, though, it's been pushed back beyond where we can see. And they have no observation about to hit that area there with any kind of chance of hitting anything.
Wow. Okay, back to June 6, 1944. This hour, 10 hours after the original request, the 12th SS Panzer Division and the Panzer Lehr Division are verbally released by the OKW. For good measure, the OKW throws in the entire 1st SS Panzer Corps, a request by OB West that was made only moments before the release. They will all be subordinated to the command of Heeresgruppe B, in other words, Rommel. The order by OB West ends with the known rapid biting of the enemy, it is essential to destroy the enemy as quickly as possible.
The 12th SS Panzer Division is to return from Lisieux and deploy south of Caen past 21st Panzer Division on the left. Panzer Lehr Division shall move immediately towards the Flers-Vire area. In effect, that means that it is unlikely they will see any action today.
Yep, it looks like Rundstedt has decided that he needs to form a defensive line further back to give the Germans a chance to live to fight another day. It's early for such decisions, and he has not explicitly said that this is what he is doing. We shall see what happens when we return for hour 16 of D-Day.